Alrighty, welcome to our first lesson of Unity 3D game design. We're going to start by opening up Unity Hub. So you should download Unity Hub. It's a simple download, and we're going to create a new project. We're going to use any editor version above 6 should work fine for this video. And we're going to use Universal 3D, and you don't have to worry about organization. And project name, I'm going to name this, 3D game video guide, whatever. So I named it. Now I'm going to click create, and it would create a new project. I already have one ready. So we're going to make a game together. Now, making a game in Unity can be a little overwhelming at first, but if you learn the basic vocabulary and understand the layout, it is honestly super simple and super straightforward. Excuse me. Okay, so we are in Unity for the first time here. Now we have a few windows that we have to learn and a few vocabulary words we have to go over. The first thing we want to learn about is game objects. Everything that exists in our Unity game is a game object. Right now, in the default view, I have 3 objects that I can view on this hierarchy list. This is my hierarchy list right here. My 3 objects are my main camera, my directional light, my global volume, and that's it. That's all I have. Each of these objects has some components that we'll talk about in a second. For now, let's see how to add new objects to a Unity game. From this hierarchy, the hierarchy is just a list of all the objects in our scene. The scene is the current level we have open. I can hit this plus button. This plus button will allow me to add new objects to my scene. We're making a 3D game, so I'll add a 3D object, and I'll use a plane. A plane is a lot like a base plate if you've played Roblox. It's just a flat surface that we're going to use as the floor when we get started making our game. We might change that out later. So now I have this plane. I have this flat surface. I'm going to set its position to 0, 0. So it's at exactly the origin point of the world. And I'll add another game object. This is the game object that we'll shortly start using as our player. I'm going to add a 3D object, and I'll add a capsule. Now, most games use capsules as their player, and then they just put some animations over it, which we'll do soon. But for now, let's just put a capsule on this plane, and let's set its position to 0. It's Z to 0. I'll set its Y to 1. And actually, I'm going to lift it up a little just so we can see something demonstrated in a moment. Okay, we have this plane, we have this capsule. I'm going to rename these things, though. What is this capsule? This capsule is going to be my player. And this plane is going to be the ground. Okay, cool. So I have a player, and I have the ground. So these are some game objects that we've now added to Unity. But if I press play, these game objects aren't going to have all of the behaviors that I would expect them to. For example, my player should probably fall down when I press play. That doesn't happen right now. To add new behaviors to game objects, we need to look at what's called their components. We looked at some components briefly already. I can click on a game object, and over here, I have a list of all of its components. So for example, this game object has a renderer. A renderer component allows it to be seen visually. If it has no renderer, now it's invisible. When I press play, we can't see it because it has no renderer. It cannot render on the screen. We need to add a new component to our player game object. We need to give it a new behavior. The new behavior that we want to give it is we want to give it physics so that when the game starts, it falls down. The physics component is called a rigid body. To add new components to a game object, we're going to click on the object we want to add a component to, and we're going to click this button down here that says Add Component. When I click on it, I can now search up rigid body, and I'm going to add a rigid body component. We're in 3D, so be sure not to add a rigid body 2D component. Rigid body. Okay, cool. Now when I press play, I have that component working. These are components. We added a new behavior to a game object by adding a new component. Within components, we have a lot of properties. Let's mess around and look at some properties really quickly. I have a collider component. My collider component determines whether or not my object can collide, can touch other objects. If I check this box, I disable my collider. What do you guys think is going to happen if I press play with no collider? Pause the video and think about it. That's right. It's not going to collide anymore. It goes right through things because I disabled its collider. Our collider also has a property inside of it called isTrigger. isTrigger is going to be really useful later. It's a property that makes it so that our collider doesn't collide with physics at all. It only checks if it's triggering code. That might be useful for like invisible buttons or invisible walls or invisible triggers that cause something to happen in our game. We'll look more at triggers later. The most useful properties is our transform properties. Transform has a property called position that determines where my X position is. It has a property called Y position that determines how far I am up and down. And it has a property called Z position that determines how far I am left and right. I also have some properties for my rotations in case I want to spin this. Rotations for different rotation directions I could spin my game objects in. Now, I'm not going to mess with rotation. I also have scale properties, so I can scale my object up. I can make him taller, shorter, whatever I want to do. I'm going to leave scale and rotation at default, and we're going to look at position for a second. Now, you might have noticed that the floor has this piece of graph paper on it. It's almost like a piece of graph paper. And the way that works is if I am looking at this graph paper, maybe if I go to 2D mode, this could be more obvious. So I'm in 2D mode. I click 2D at the top. I click my player, and I can press F to focus on where my player is. I could right-click to pan my camera around. I see that I'm on like some graph paper. I'm going to zero everything out. 0, 0, 0. So this point right here, this coordinate point right here, would be the origin point. This point right here. That's the point 0, 0, 0. Now, if I increase my X coordinate point by 1, which coordinate point am I going to end up at? I think I'm going to end up here. Let's try it. X is 1. I did end up here. How did I predict that? This works exactly the same as coordinate points in your math class. The origin point isn't really marked. We know it's this one right here because we checked. But now as I increase by y, I'm going to go up points. As I decrease by y, I'm going to go down points. Let's try y is 5. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My center point will be right here at x is 1 and y is 5. Let's try it. Y is 5, and I go right to where I said I would. What if my x is negative? That's going to make me go backwards. That's going to make me go over here somewhere. Maybe my x can be negative 5. Now I'm back here somewhere. Maybe my y could be negative. I'll set my y to negative 3. That's a little too far, negative. Negative 1. Now I'm down here. Again, I can hold my middle mouse wheel to pan around. Okay, so it works exactly like a coordinate point, but there's one more coordinate. It's z, but z doesn't look like it's doing anything in 2D mode. But in 3D mode, we could see that z, we don't just have left and right and up and down. We also have what I call forward and back. Forward and back. We have 3 coordinate points, x, y, and z. Okay, 3 coordinate points, x, y, and z. That's interesting. That's how every computer application you've ever used, everything you've ever used on a computer works like that. My computer uses x and y coordinate points. This window, this position right here, this point up here in the top left corner is the point 0, 0. And as I move this around, this top left corner goes to different coordinate points. That's how Windows is programmed. X and Y coordinate points. Your 3D games, Call of Duty, every position your player is ever in on the screen, that position is saved using an X, a Y, and a Z coordinate. There's no other way that people do it. Every video game is just saved on graph paper, just like in your math class. Okay, cool. We talked about game objects. We could add new objects in the hierarchy. The hierarchy is a list of objects. We talked about components. Our components all show up in this inspector tab by default on the right side. If a tab ever goes missing, for example, if I close a tab, oh no, I can't find my inspector. What I always do is I click at the top layout, default. Now I'm back on default layout. We have our objects saved in the hierarchy. Each object is defined by its components and those components' properties. Those components are listed out in the inspector, the object inspector. We have one more tab that's really important that we haven't talked about, and it's our project folders. All of our files are saved to our project folders. We're going to go to our asset folders in the project window, and we're going to create a new asset folder. We'll create a materials folder. I'm going to right click in assets and create a folder called materials. Assets are all the files in our game. An asset doesn't necessarily have to be in our game yet, and an asset can be in our game 100 times. If a game object was in our game multiple times, it would show up multiple times in this inspector, but each asset is only saved once. For example, I have 2 grounds now. There's 2 grounds in my hierarchy. In my project folders, I'm going to create a new material. We right-clicked, we created a folder called materials. Now I'm going to right-click, I'm going to create a material called ground. Now I can click in the base map of this material and I can make it green. And now I've created an asset. An asset is a file. It might be a MP3 file. It might be a video file. It might be a texture file. It might be a, sound files. It might be animation files. It might be 3D model files. It might be mesh files. It might be any kind of files you could think of. It might be input files. It might be any file that's in our game is saved in our project asset folders. I have this material file saved now. It's a green material, but I'm not using it in my game yet. This is just where we save our files. Now I can drag this ground material into my game and I can make my ground green. That's awesome. I don't like the green though. I could change every game object that's using that asset. I could change all at once by changing the asset itself. So I can go back to this asset and maybe I actually want a darker green. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. Maybe I'll reduce the smoothness as well. So it's like a darker, rougher green. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. I think that looks great. Cool. Let's create one more material, and then we'll move on to the next lesson. We'll have talked about creating assets, creating game objects, and creating components for those game objects. And that will be a great start for Unity. I'm going to right-click. We're going to create another material, and I'll create a, player blue, I guess. So I'm going to create a blue player material for my player. I'll drag that onto my player. And maybe I make my player more metallic and shiny so he stands out more. Okay, cool. That'll be my player. I think that's it for our first lesson. We talked about some core Unity, navigation things, like where to find our game objects in the hierarchy. We talked about where to find those game objects components by clicking on them and viewing all of their components in the inspector. We talked about what certain components did, like renderers allow us to see the object. Colliders allow 2 objects that both have colliders to touch each other. Objects can only touch if they both have colliders. We created a material which allows our game object to have different colors. And we talked about the rigid body component that allows our game object to have physics. We created 2 new assets in a materials folder to give materials to our objects. Next time, we'll look at adding some scripts. Maybe we'll look at adding some other properties. Maybe we'll look at children. We'll see. There's a lot to learn, and I'm excited. Have a great day. Good luck, and always email me if you need any help.